particularly over the last sort of 12 months.
The Department of Health says no one should have to wait longer than necessary for emergency care and that it's taking urgent action to support services. Ministers say police could be allowed to break up protests before they become highly disruptive. The government is introducing an amendment to the Public Order Bill in Parliament later, which it says will give police greater clarity about when they can intervene. Critics fear it will stop people from being able to have their voices heard. A man has been arrested under the Terrorism Act after traces of uranium were found in a cargo package at Heathrow Airport last month. The suspect in his 60s was detained by police in Cheshire. He's been bailed until April. The latest talks are due to be held between the UK and the EU, with expectations a breakthrough on the Northern Ireland Protocol is close. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly is due to discuss the post-Brexit trade arrangements with his European Commission counterpart. Britain's Jack Draper has fallen to a 4-set defeat against Rafael Nadal in the first round of the Australian Open tennis. He struggled with cramp during the match in Melbourne, and Nick Kyrgios has withdrawn from the tournament due to injury. In the City a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading up 8 points at 78.52, and the pound buys $1.21 and €1.12. LBC weather: rain and hill snow clearing from the far southeast, wintry showers following, mainly across the north, dry with some sunny spells elsewhere, and a cold day, a high of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Simon Conway.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call Keir. Put your questions to the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, now. 0345 6060 973. This is LBC.
Morning, just 3 minutes after 9 on Monday, the 16th of January. Yes, it is your opportunity to put your calls to the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, who, I don't know, seems to have walked into the studio with an extra spring in his step. I don't know whether that might be to do with the football results, which we might come to in a moment or two. Thank you for coming to the studio. I sense we might get there. Keir, congratulations to the team. I know you've followed passionately since you were a boy, and they seem to be in a good place.
Great win yesterday.
It was a great. Let's look at the results of what you were talking about for the health service yesterday. I think that's going to be the first call. You had a lengthy piece in the Sunday Telegraph. You subsequently went on the TV and had a lengthy interview, and the calls are already coming in. So it's Connie in Leatherhead who's through first. Connie, you're through to Sir Keir. Go ahead. Good morning. And tell everyone what you do for a living, Connie.
Morning, Connie.
I am a nurse. I work in hospital at the moment. I've worked in the community for quite some time. Hence the question I wanted to ask you, Sir Keir.
Yep.
Yeah, Connie, far away.
Yes, you have promised to slash what you call nonsensical bureaucracy within the GP services. How do you plan to do this with a service which is already in crisis and on its knees at the moment?
Connie, look, I completely accept the service is in crisis and on its knees. In fact, I'd say it's on its face. Connie, as Nick and some listeners will know, my wife works in the NHS, so I know firsthand, she's in one of the big London hospitals, I know firsthand just how bad it is. But that is exactly why we need to change the NHS. And Connie, what I've said is, look, we know we need more staff. So if you think you need more staff, I completely agree with you. And we've said, look, let's get rid of the non-dom status. That's a tax rule that allows very rich people to pay their tax in places other than this country. We'd get rid of that and double the number of medical students coming through. So you've got backup, so you know the cavalry are coming. But on the bureaucracy, we have got to, the NHS is on its face. More money is needed, of course it is, but we also need to change. People are living longer. We need preventative medicine. We need intervention, but also some of the bureaucracy, Connie, that we need to get rid of. Some people could refer themselves to physios, etc., and they have to go through the GP. Connie, you will know anybody who's tried to get a doctor's appointment on the day, the 8 o'clock call, is an absolute nightmare to try and get an appointment. So we need to lift the bureaucracy, get the bureaucracy out of the way focus on the patient. But Connie, this is not to impose a further burden on you and the NHS. It's actually to lift the burden, change the NHS, make it fit for the future.
Connie, back to you in a second. You said yesterday, Sir Keir, if you've got back pain and you want to see a physio, it ought to be possible, I think, to self-refer. You went on, and I quote, if you've got internal bleeding and you just need a test, there ought to be a way that doesn't involve going to see a GP. How am I meant to diagnose I've got internal bleeding? Where's the medical advice there, Sir Keir?
Nick, I was trying to be a little bit delicate because it was 9:00 yesterday morning that I was having this interview. What I meant by this...
It's 9:06 now, Sir Keir. You can go where you want to go.
Well, let me just be clear, because I know there's been a discussion about this. This is blood that you would see in the toilet.
I see.
And when that happens, it's obviously very scary.
This is blood in your stools?
In your stool,
or your urine?
Yeah. Right. What then happens is, understandably, people go to their GP. The GP invariably says, you need to take this test, go home, take the test, and then book again to come back so that I can see what the results are. So you go because you're anxious to the GP, understandably. All the GP says is, go and now take this test, because until I get results, I can't really help you. So what I was suggesting is, look, you could cut out the first bit of that, because we know the test, get back to the GP more quickly with the result of the test. So that's what that was about. It's an example, Nick, of what we're talking about in terms of the changes.
Back pain, Sir Keir. Won't everyone seek to do that? I don't need to tell you. You reference the fact that your wife is in the NHS. You'll be aware of so-called Dr. Google. And if ever you've got a condition, you Google, and I immediately get a duty solicitor to rewrite the will because I wonder if I'm going to live. Isn't that going to be the danger here, surely?
Yeah, we need to have
but you just send everyone to go up. What are the guidelines?
No,
okay?
I mean, all of this will be subject to discussion with the professionals, of course, as to what would work and what wouldn't. But, Nick, we've got so many examples of people going to a GP and then being referred elsewhere, and there are examples where we think we can cut that down. And we've got to, Nick, because, look, GPs are overwhelmed. I think we had, 4,000 have left. We don't have enough GPs. We've got to think differently about the future of the NHS. And we've got to be prepared to do things which, until now, people have said, no, don't do it, it's too difficult.
Well, credit for you, lastly, for thinking the possible unthinkable. Just lastly, you are aware that organisations such as the BMA, they're not openly critical, but they say the idea it would alleviate NH pressure is very unlikely.
Nick, I have heard that, and obviously I don't want to go to war with the doctors or the BMA, but we've got to change if we're going to improve the outcome for patients and if the NHS is to survive. I've always been a reformer of public services. I ran the Crown Prosecution Service, and we had to reform it. And every time, Nick, I started to reform anything, there would be no end of people saying, no, don't do it, we've always done it this way, etc. When I started as Director of Public Prosecutions, we still had a paper file. I went to an office in Wales, and the van turned up at 4:00 in the afternoon to drive the paper files over the mountain to the nearest court, and I just could not believe that was happening. And with others, we changed to start the work towards a digital file. There were plenty of people then, just as there are now in relation to the NHS, saying, don't do it, it's always been paper, it works very well. But actually, it had to change. Things in the NHS have to change. I'm the deepest believer in the NHS. I've said this so many times. My mum was a nurse, my sister was a nurse, my wife works in the NHS. Her mum was a doctor. So it's deep, but it's so deep that I know that if we don't reform, then the NHS will die, and we've got a duty to change.
Has you referenced your wife? Has she ever thought of striking or quitting?
No, I mean, she'll speak for herself.
But just the state of the NHS. I've had the privilege of meeting your wife. I wonder whether she's ever thought, you know what, Keir, I don't know, I can stick this any longer.
I don't think she would quit. Obviously, she'll speak for herself. She loves what she's doing. There is that sense of public service, because everybody works in the NHS goes there because it's a job and they get paid, but there's also something over and above that, this sense of public service. But it's really tough. Okay. And I just on that, Nick, because I do think it's really important, because there was this suggestion from the government that somehow in return for, better pay, somehow nurses and others needed to work harder. I would remind anybody who wants to go down that route that during the pandemic, certainly at my wife's hospital, and I think pretty well across the country, every day they were off, because it was weekend or a holiday, they got a text saying, could you possibly come in, please? Many of them did, and those that didn't felt guilty that they couldn't. I think to start to say you need to work harder to those people working on the front line at NHS is deeply, deeply insulting.
Why so squeamish about the toilet, Sir Keir?
Well, it was early on a Sunday morning. I thought, well, anyway, that's. Well, we now know what I was referring to.
We got to the bottom of things.
Exactly. Very good.
Connie, good luck with the work you do.
Thank you,
You're
Connie.
on the front line. Bless you. Keep at it as we go to our next call. Cam in Nuneaton. Cam, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Cam.
Good morning, guys.
Hello, sir.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to ask, you received over 350,000 in donations from Dale Vince, but have also condemned Just Stop Oil. Does this contradict your personal stance on Just Stop Oil?
Dale Vince is, let me just read this, Dale Vince is the businessman who owns a football club, Forest Green. He's given, it as reported, £20,000 when you were running for leader. He also gave Angela Rayner £10,000, it says here. He's donated £350,000 to the Labour Party, but also tens of thousands to Just Stop Oil. You're not a fan of that organisation. How do you respond to Cam's question?
Cam, I'm not a fan of that organisation. I think, Nick, you and I discussed this either last time or the time before. I think that their actions are wrong. I think they're arrogant. And, Nick, I think I heard this morning somebody who phoned in saying that the ambulances aren't stopped or unable to get. I've seen the visuals of that, and I feel so strongly because, years ago, it would be my mum in the back of that ambulance, and it is somebody else's mum or dad or sister or brother. So I don't, I'm absolutely against what they're doing.
Or rather, the party has taken that cash, and you've taken some.
Dale Vincent is, look, he donated to the Labour Party. He knows me very well. He knows that nothing that he donates to the Labour Party is going to affect my judgment on this. Obviously, it's up to him what he does with his money, but the fact he donates will not make a blind bit of difference to the tough line that I take in relation to Just Stop Oil.
Quick response from you, one sentence, if you would, Cam.
Well, fair enough.
All right. Fair enough, that's what we needed. Cam, thank you for that. We move on. Gail in Kensington. Gail, you're through to Sir Keir Starmer. Go ahead. Morning.
Hi, Gail.
Hello, Sir Keir. I know Parliament has a great deal on its plate at present, so please be patient with me.
Oh, that's all right, Gail, don't worry.
The question is, should Harry and Meghan come to the coronation of King Charles in May? Harry's present book has apparently at least 15 errors from reputable journalists, and he is threatening our royal family with an even worse book if they don't apologise to Meghan. For what, pray?
All right. I think we need to put a caveat. I've not heard of that threat, but certainly there is a ticklish constitutional issue facing the King and others, I'm sure. Should Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, be president? Sir Keir Starmer.
Look, Gail, thank you for raising this. I haven't read the book. Obviously, there's been extensive coverage. I might.
Under what circumstances would you read it, Sir Keir?
Well, interest, etc. I've tried, Gail, not to wade into this. I think politicians in the end have to take a choice. Do you want to wade into these disputes in the royal family or not? I mean, I think it's really sad and tragic that there are these disputes. My view is that we shouldn't wade in. I don't think politicians wading in helps. Obviously, there will come this question, Gail, that you've posed, which is in relation to the coronation. In the end, I think it will probably be down to what the King feels about it, and he'll make his decision. But I'm not for wading into these issues. I think once politicians have waded in, you have to wade all the way in. And I don't really think that. I've never seen an example where that's actually helped the situation.
Given that it's possibly going to colour the relationship between father and son, and there's every likelihood you're going to be enjoying regular audiences with the King, don't you need to know some of the background, Sir Keir?
Well, probably. And I mean, certainly, Nick, I hope I'll have regular audiences with the King. That requires us to win the election, which he was utterly focused on. I've met the King a number of times. But I've had the privilege of.
You met Harry?
No, I haven't. But I've with the King, we had if you're leader of the opposition now, it's not uncommon, and I've had one-to-ones with the King for 45 minutes on our own. And that was really, I mean, he's passionate about what he believes in, a huge public servant, and I've got a huge amount of respect for him. And I would obviously listen to any views he had on this, should that arise.
Can we come back? Thank you for the call, Gail. Can we come back to Just Stop Oil and the story you may have seen on the front pages of one of the newspapers? Police to be given powers to shut down protests before any disruption begins under the Prime Minister's plans for a public order crackdown, which aim to prevent tactics such as slow marching. I sense if you were listening to LBC earlier today, Sir Keir, you probably heard quite a lot about this. Are these changes in law necessary in your view?
Well, I'm not sure they are, Nick. I mean, we'll wait and see what they are. And there are plenty of examples of the government sort of grabbing the headlines. I am as strong as anyone in the argument that we need to take action against Just Stop Oil. I mean, doing yourself to the road, taking those actions, stopping ambulances getting through. Wrong, deeply arrogant, and I want the police to act. What I would say is this. I think the police have the power to act, and that's why I think the Commissioner...
Well, respectfully, you should know. I mean, you're a former DPP. You should have a good sense of it, one would imagine.
Yeah, well, Nick, I can tell you, in the 5 years that I was Director of Public Prosecutions, we didn't have a single case like this where the file came across my desk and I said, we can't take an action because we don't have the powers. And I think there's a sort of reality check here. What the police want, I think what the Commissioner is actually asking for is not so much a change in the law, but clarity. Do I have these powers? So if I was Prime Minister, Nick, what I would do, instead of more headline-grabbing legislation, I would get the chief constables into a room, sit them down with me and say, right, what's the problem? Because I don't accept that if you are walking at a sort of funereal pace, that is not obstructing the highway. And I think if the police were told in terms, yes, that is an offence, get on and do something about it, they could get on and do something about it tomorrow morning. My worry with this government is, for every problem, their answer is always, let's do some more legislation. Well, get on with what you've got. I mean, they're doing the same with minimum service levels. Instead of solving the strikes, let's have some more legislation. They did it with small boats. Instead of actually knocking heads together and do something, let's have some legislation. You can't just legislate your way out of every problem. I would get the chief constables in, I'd get the Commissioner in and say, right, what's the problem? Do you need legal clarity? If so, let's get the most senior lawyer we can to give the strongest opinion and test it in court. If we did that, we could actually take this action tomorrow instead of waiting for legislation to go through.
I have to say, most serving coppers seem to agree with you on that point, Sir Keir. Let's move to other calls, if we may. Anne in Canterbury, and you're through to Sir Keir Starmer. Go ahead. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick, and good morning, Sir Keir.
Hi, Anne.
Hello there. I worked for a number of years as a mainstream classroom teacher. I now work within the Specialist Education Centre. And obviously, Sir Keir, you'll be aware of, not just workload, incredible workload pressures on teachers, but also, substantial financial pressures in terms of real-term incomes and how they've dropped over the last 12 years or so. And I wondered, in view of the forthcoming ballot result for teachers striking, how you felt about teachers going on strike.
Well, look, Anne, firstly, thank you for the work you've done as a teacher and now as a specialist teacher. I know that's tough, and I know that over the last 10, 13 years under this government, it's got tougher and tougher with fewer people, less resources and more pressures. And so thank you for what you've done. The financial situation is such with the cost of living crisis that increasing numbers of people are being driven towards industrial action. And I think it's very hard for the government to say it's this particular union or that particular union when your nurses, possibly your teachers, your railway people, your border staff are all on strike. Then there's a problem which is deep, and that's the cost of living crisis. But Anne, let me be absolutely straight with you. I do not want teachers to go on strike. I don't want nurses to be on strike. I don't think nurses want to be on strike. What I do want is a grown-up government that gets in the room with the relevant parties and solves the issues. What drives me to points of frustration is at the moment we've got a government that thinks that it's best to sit this out and sit on its hands. And so, Anne, I want to see the issues resolved, and I want to see a government that actually gets on and starts governing instead of grandstanding. Quick response from you, Anne.
To be honest, I totally agree. I mean, I think as well that you can't underestimate, Sir Keir, exactly what you said about how those professions feel about having to go on strike. I think there wouldn't be a teacher who didn't feel extremely conflicted about whether they should strike, just as the same with health professionals.
OK, and thank you for that. Before we come on to the next call, which is going to be you, Adam, there was an horrific event in your constituency over the weekend. We can talk a little bit about it because you know better than I, although there's been arrest, no charges have been brought. I heard you on the radio saying that this possibly speaks to a reform in gun law. What did you mean by that, Sir Keir?
Yeah.
This is the shooting, just remind me, this is the horrific shooting at the funeral.
Yeah, Nick, this was an awful shooting over the weekend at a funeral in my constituency in Euston. Obviously, I've been in constant contact with the police and had intelligence briefings, and I need to be careful not to disclose any of that, although I'm pleased that the police have been able to act relatively quickly, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of you and everybody listening to LBC and sending our thoughts and best wishes to the family concerned, particularly the young girl. We've had these incidents from time to time with guns. There was one down in Plymouth, if you remember, last year. Mm-hmm. And every time there's evidence which I am concerned about that people have access to guns that they shouldn't have access to. Now, if it's illegal access, obviously that's a pure matter of the criminal law, but other people where better checks should be taken on the circulation of guns. And so I think that we need to look again as to whether those laws are strong enough. Now, that may or may not help this particular case, and I be careful not to go into the details.
This is likely to be an illegally owned gun. Let's rephrase. There are many illegally owned guns out there, Sir Keir.
There are many illegally owned guns out there, and there are legally owned guns which I don't think should be in the hands of the people who are legally owning them.
What informs you of that, Sir Keir?
Well, every time there's one of these incidents, I think after Plymouth there was then a review of all the cases.
So you want tougher restrictions on gun ownership?
Each county then looked, and in each case there were examples where, in my view, the individual should not have been allowed to carry a gun.
So you would see gun ownership made even tougher?
Yeah.
Outlawed completely?
No, not outlawed completely, because I think there are farmers, etc., but subject to tighter control.
Gun clubs?
Again, I mean, for sports clubs, etc., I wouldn't have a problem with that.
OK, let's move on to other calls. Amber's in Edinburgh. Amber, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Hi, Amber.
Hi, good morning there.
Hello.
Sir Keir, I was listening to what you said yesterday when you had your interview with Laura Kunsberg.
Yes.
And now I'm a trans woman living in Edinburgh, and I fought quite hard for this bill, and I worked with others for the gender recognition reform bill in Scotland. And I was quite surprised at two things. One, you said that you think that 16-year-olds is too young to be able to apply for a gender recognition certificate, when in fact people in Scotland at 16 can get married. And the second thing is you seem to hint at the fact that you think Rishi Sunak is correct at blocking the bill. And as somebody that looks like to be the next Prime Minister and winning the next general election, I'd like to know why.
Well, Amber, let me take this in the right, get the tone right in this, because too often, Amber, when there's a discussion about these issues, it slips too quickly, in my view, into sort of a toxic debate with examples being thrown around. I approach this on the basis that I think the British public are pretty respectful and pretty tolerant, and they know there has to be a balance. I approach it on the basis, Amber, that, you know, for 99.9% of women, it is all about biology. Sex-based rights matter, and we must preserve all those wins that we've had for women over many years, and including safe spaces for women. But I accept, Amber, and readily accept that there are a small number of people who do not identify with the gender into which they were born, and they are often amongst the most abused in our society, and they should be respected, and there should be a process, as there is under the law, for them to be recognised in the gender they identify with. And that's the law that we've had in place now for a number of years. So I approach it with respect and with safeguards. In relation, Amber, to your point, I'm afraid I do think that 16 is too young. Now, people would just have different views on this, but I think 16 is too young for that process.
What would the right age be, Sir Keir?
Well, I would go for 18. 8 of the age of adulthood in most cases. So I think that's wrong. I'm also worried, Amber, about the impact on equality laws. That's why various amendments were put down to the legislation in Scotland. Now, I have those concerns, Amber. I think what I want to have, Amber, is a grown-up debate about this. I do think the law needs to be modernised. I am worried, Amber, if I'm honest, just about the fact that I think this is being used by the SNP as a sort of devolution political football, and I think it's being used by the government, or might be used, depending on what view they take, as a sort of as a divisive football in relation to the particular issue. And I think that's
football?
Well, it's just where let's see if we could on this whole issue of trans rights. I think the government is looking to divide people rather than bring people together.
But were they to oppose the Gender Recognition Act, the government, the Westminster government, would you support them?
Well, let's see. They're being very careful in what they're saying.
But I sense your initial feeling would be one to support.
Well, no, I want to see exactly what they've said. They are. Number 10 is treading very, very carefully, as you would
Well, it's a very
imagine.
delicate issue, of course.
And it will be the first time that a provision passed in Scotland ever been blocked. That is a big step for a government to take. I will wait and see what they do and the reasons they say they're doing it, but
let's get Amber back
I do not want this to be just another political football.
Quick response, Amber, from you before we move on.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
So,
thank you for your answer, Sir Keir. Now, you are saying that this bill in Scotland isn't really shaping up to what you would like to see. Yet, literally every single member of Scottish Labour voted for it.
No, Amber.
So what do you say to all the MSPs, the Scottish Labour MSPs who voted for this bill and actually got amendments accepted at stage 2 of this bill under their name?
Yeah, Amber, I mean, not all the amendments that they wanted went through, and that troubles me. Obviously, as it went through the Scottish Parliament, it's a matter for Scotland and for Scottish Labour, but it now is becoming a UK-wide issue, because the question now is whether or not the government should take action to interfere with the usual royal assent. So it's now moved, Amber, from a purely Scottish issue into a UK-wide issue, and that's why it's very important I make my position clear.
Amber, thank you. Let's move to other matters. One newspaper last week, I need to tell the listeners it was the Daily Mail, published a list of what they claim is pledges that you've broken, such as increasing income tax for the top 5% of earners, abolishing universal credit, supporting the abolition of tuition fees, supporting common ownership of rail, mail, energy and water, and defending free movement as we leave the EU. If you believe it, if you agree with all of this, why do you keep breaking these promises?
Nick, I made a number of pledges to my party in the leadership campaign. They were clearly matters of value and principle for me. My party voted me in as leader of my party.
But now you're not going to carry any of them out?
Since then, what I've had to do since then is recognise, firstly, we've been through COVID, we've got conflict in Ukraine, and we've got a government that's done huge damage to the economy. And therefore, in the event that the Labour Party wins the next election, the economy will be in a much, much poorer situation than it was 3 years ago, still less 13 years ago. And so I have to be realistic about what is possible. Just to take one of them, Nick, to just give you an idea about how I think and what it is. This is the question of public ownership of various assets.
Rail, mail, energy.
So when we had the energy crisis last summer and the bills were going up, I asked my team, we have to have a response to this because people's bills are going to go through the roof. And I said, and include, please, within that, what it would look like if we were to go for public ownership of the energy companies, for example. And they gave me that option. And they also gave me the option of using the money from windfall tax on oil and gas companies to pay directly for the reduction of bills. And I had to make a political choice, which is, do we use that money to pay off the shareholders for the energy companies? Or do we use it to reduce people's bills in the middle of a cost of living crisis? And I took the political choice, and I'll defend that and explain that. But that is because, as a leader, you have to respond to the situation you're in. But Nick, just one last thing, if I may, on this, because it does keep coming.
Yep.
The changes we've made to the Labour Party, the decisions we're making and putting ourselves in a position to serve our country is overwhelmingly supported by the Labour Party. So the sense that there are people there saying, in the Labour Party saying, I no longer support Keir and his passionate drive to get us into government. That's not the case. The overwhelming majority of the Labour Party are behind what we're doing. And that's why at our conference last year, you saw such a confident, united Labour Party.
I was there, and I did. Lastly, the policy from Labour for free bus travel for under 25s in the last general election, is that still a possibility under Labour, or is that now reviewed?
Well, it needs to be reviewed because
that's not gonna happen either,
everything. Nick, treat the 2019 manifesto as gone. We will write the next manifesto from scratch.
Bus travel's gone, isn't it?
I will be there will be no commitment from Labour that isn't fully costed. What we can afford now isn't what we might have been able to afford 3 or 4 years ago. And that's why I said at my party conference, a lot of people scratched their head and said, what's he driving at? I said, there are good Labour things that we won't be able to do as quickly as we wanted because of the situation we'll inherit.
Would we be in a better place had Britain voted Labour in 2019?
Yeah, we could hardly be in a worse place. Well, we've had no growth, no significant growth in our economy for 13 years. And Nick,
with Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister,
I would,
we'd be in a better place.
I would just ask everybody listening to this to just maybe close their eyes and ask them another question. Do I feel better off than I did 13 years ago? Are our public services better than they were 13 years ago? Is our economy better than it was 13 years ago? I think the answer to that is no. That's why we need change.
We've got time, hopefully, one crucial question about Ukraine, if you can take it. It's Adam in Nottingham. Adam, thank you for holding, sir. This is a crucial question. If I could ask you to ask it moderately briefly, I'd be so indebted to you. Adam.
Hi, Adam.
Morning, Nick. Morning, Sir Keir.
Morning.
The government's recently pledged 12 Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine. One of the only good things this Tory government seems to be doing at the minute is to support for Ukraine. Would a Labour government increase support for Ukraine even more so than the current government?
Thanks, Adam. Sir Keir.
Adam, we would certainly match the government. And Adam, throughout this tragic conflict, I have faithfully tried not to criticise our government because I think there's nothing Putin wants more than division. So I support what the government has said on tanks here. We might go further, but I'm not trying to get one ahead of the government here because I think that would be to play games with a very serious situation. We would work in lockstep with NATO, but do I support the government's stance on Ukraine? Yes.
Could they have moved quicker, Sir Keir? Former top NATO commander has described the decision as welcome but tardy. Could they have moved quicker?
Look, I think, in fairness to Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, who has kept me personally informed of developments, and I'm very grateful for that, he has tried to act in lockstep with NATO, and I'm not going to sit on the sidelines and cause division. I think we need a united front against Putin, and my Labour Party will not play party politics with this for 1 second.
You talk about sitting on the sidelines. Yesterday afternoon, you sat on the sidelines. You see what I did there? Come on, the Prem is Arsenal's now, isn't it?
It was a fantastic game yesterday, Nick.
Who did you take with you?
I was with David Lammy.
Just remind my listeners which team he follows.
Strong Tottenham supporter. So I had a doubly great afternoon yesterday. But listen, I'm of course biased. I'm a lifelong Arsenal fan, a season ticket holder. But this is a great team. It's a real and. As I said to some of the Tottenham fans yesterday, you'd have to really dislike football not to enjoy the football that Arsenal are playing at the moment. The trouble is, every game, when you're at the top, gets harder and more nervous. And so we've got a long season ahead of us. But I think this is a title-winning team, but it's tough.
And a word on that fan who went after the goalkeeper.
Oh, shocking. Really shocking. And Tottenham fans know that as well. Shouldn't have happened, and I hope that he's found and that he's at least banned from ever attending a football match again.
Pretty strong stuff. Sir Keir, thanks for joining us here on LBC. Sir Keir Starmer, where the 9:30 news follows this.
The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has told LBC police already have the powers they need to break up protests. The government announced an amendment to the Public Order Bill, which it says would allow officers to intervene before a demonstration causes disruption. A man is being questioned over Saturday's drive-by shooting near a church in Euston, in which 6 people were injured. A 7-year-old girl remains in a serious but stable condition in hospital. The man is being held on suspicion of attempted murder.